Well, this is a true story, as all of mine are. And I want to thank my wife for being here. She's in the story. Thanks. This story is called Chicken House Days. Of all the places one could live in a college town, it seems that I've tried them all. When I first arrived at New Paltz in 1970, I had a car full of junk, a head swirling with Woodstock memories, and no place to go. I just showed up in the dead of winter and transferred in, and expecting to find a place on one day's notice. I got lucky and landed my first very small room in a 19th century colonial on Chestnut Street for $50 a month. While living in town had its advantages, I decided going up country had a much sweeter sound. So I packed up all my stuff at the end of my first semester and moved out of the little apartment, a little room on Chestnut Street, 20 miles away to the other side of Mohonk Mountain to Cripplebush. There I shared a house with a poet. He had never had any of his poetry published and was about 10 years older than me. Of course, he couldn't make a living at his chosen profession, so he wrote porno novels to pay the rent under the pseudonym of William Shears, a name he plucked from Sgt. Pepper's. Unfortunately, his porno novels were just all too literary for his intended audience, and he never really developed a following for them or his poetry. Next stop, I decided to take my English professor's kind offer to move into his chicken house in Pine Bush. Now, let's look at this while not stoned. A what? A chicken house. Modern conveniences? None. Rent? Nope. That clinched it. I would live out the Woodstock generation's dream in the woods, in the chicken house. So I hauled off all my stuff to the chicken house. The good news was that the chickens had long escaped or went to visit the colonel. I guess it was technically a former chicken house. Irving and Ann Weiss offered me these new digs and added a security blanket, God bless them. I could eat with the family and use their facilities. As the chicken house was bereft of all modern conveniences except for electricity and a potbelly stove, joining the family certainly made up for its shortcomings. Even the kids didn't seem to mind, bohemians all. Then for me, the worst thing happened. Winter temperatures dropped to 20 below zero. Adding to its many faults, the chicken house was not weather-tight. Its clapboards were all askew, and the wind whistled through. The potbelly stove threw heat in a 6-foot circle and glowed bright red in the pitch dark of the chicken house nights. My bed was outside the ring of fire, so the electric blanket was the only thing standing between me and frozen death. My wife Janet came to visit me once down from Geneseo, and I treated her to all of the great pleasures of chicken house life. I decided afterwards to show her some of the places that I had lived in, and all of these before moving to the chicken house, so I decided to take her on the grand tour. We first drove over the mountain to Cripplebush. The poet had long since vacated the premises to parts unknown, and the place looked abandoned. Janet said, well, maybe I've only lived in dorms my whole life in college, but now that seems like heaven compared to the places where you've lived. Maybe she was right. My living arrangements were never very conducive to studying. I began to second guess why I had ever even embarked on a tour of these past living arrangements. I thought it would be fun, but now I was losing heart. Finally, I brought it to the house on Chestnut Street. The little room at the top of the stairs was actually taken over by a guy I knew. As we climbed the stairs, Janet had this quizzical look on her face, but said nothing. I'm sure she was just keeping her criticism to herself. We went up to my old room at the top of the stairs, knocked, but he wasn't in. The door was ajar, so I pushed it open, and I showed her the artwork that I had painted on the walls. We sat on his bed for a quiet moment. She looked at me lovingly, and then she told me something that stopped me cold. When I was a little girl, I would visit New Paltz because my aunt was a postmistress at the post office down the street on Chestnut. "So you know this house?" I asked, as I looked in her eyes, still trying to understand that look on her face. "Know it," she said. "Yes, I know this place. This was my aunt's house." I was stunned into silence for a long moment. "Unbelievable," I said. "What are the odds? So you've been here before?" As soon as I said it, I knew it sounded stupid. Of course she had been. All I could add was, "I can't believe it," shaking my head. We sat there again for a long while until Janet broke the silence. "We're sitting in the room where I used to sleep when I came and visited as a little girl." "This was your room?" I blurted out. "I spent a lot of time here." Again, the silence followed me. What were the chances that my future wife and I were brought together across time? It was destiny beyond our control. "Isn't life strange?" she said. "You know how things happen." I looked at my feet. "Why did you do that to my walls?" she vexed, referencing the psychedelic mural that was still visible. It no longer seemed cool. Life is a series of unplanned events. There is no script. Sharing life across the boundaries of time brought us together closer than ever before and would connect us forever. Was it just chance, fate, destiny? "Let me show you something," Janet said, breaking my reverie. She leaned across the bed and opened up the door to the narrow little closet in the room. On the back of the door in the lower left-hand corner was the name Janet, inscribed in a heart. "I don't ever remember seeing it before. I wrote that when I was 10, she said. She left a mark for someone to find. Maybe she expected to be there again, or maybe she just needed to claim a piece of her world. I never asked. Me, I've never seemed to have left any visible sign of any place I've ever occupied. Not the chicken house or the house in Cripplebush, not even the house I grew up in, none of them. The only marks left are on memories of good times there. And now, Janet gave me a new reason to reach out and hold on to these places in my mind. But there is a postscript to this story. Nearly 40 years later, I did find one mark of sorts connected with my chicken house days. I found out that Irving Weiss's youngest daughter was now living in, of all places, Dix Hills. Irving was now almost 90 and moved in with her after his wife Ann had passed away. I had a need to reconnect with Irving. After tracking down his daughter and knocking on her front door, we spent a few minutes talking, which allowed me time to explain who I was, and for her to remember those days in Pine Bush. After all, she was just a young girl back then. She asked me to come in. And out of nowhere, a few moments later, she thanked me. "What for?" I said. "For moving into the chicken house," she said. I was surprised she actually remembered me at all. I must have looked puzzled. Irving was there, and it was uncanny to bond with him again after all of those years. He remembered me and my chicken house days. Not only didn't I expect his daughter to remember me, I was sure that my life in the chicken house was only a fleeting glimpse of a stranger intruding on her teenage years. "Why the thanks?" I asked. "I didn't think you would recall my living in the chicken house." She said, "You had an impact long after you left." "How could that be?" I asked. "We really enjoyed the pot plants you left growing in the woods behind the chicken house." I guess everyone leaves some mark of his or her existence on the earth, no matter how fleeting. Thank you.